said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the cry because it's awful. Yes, it's scary. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the denial. It's not possible. I can't pivot. There's no way to do this. Okay, fine. That's cool. Get through that stage. Now there's the care and tending of yourself and your team. Then you start going to like, okay, what could we do if we could do something? Right? So something you can't, sometimes you can't even go straight to what can we do. It's like, okay, nothing we can do. But if we could do something, what could we do? Right? And you'll be
Hypothetically
surprised
speaking, of
at what I
course.
just hypothetically speaking, because of course you can't do anything. Then you start coming up with new ideas and all this really cool things because the brain, our capacity is unlimited. We have unbelievable capacity to create. So recognize that and don't live in the fear. Yes, fear is a reality of our human existence. We can't eliminate fear so much. There are techniques you can use to calm your fears down, learn them, do them, whatever. But in the end, just recognize if you say never die, like we don't walk away, we don't go aimlessly into the night silently and just disappear. We just never say die.
Hey everyone, Daniel Topor here and welcome to the Dancing with Dad podcast, where we go deep into how leaders have overcome adversity to unleash their success and delve into the why. Why are we really here on this big, beautiful earth? Joining me today from sunny Spain is Kerry-Ann Powell. Kerry-Ann is a global champion of small and medium enterprise. She believes that running an SME doesn't need to involve a tornado of chaos, and she wants all of us to know that there's a better way to do business. Kerry-Ann's got 20 years under her belt as a Washington attorney, lobbyist, and fundraising leader. And fair to say, she's proper big time, having raised a staggering $120 million to build the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. These days, Kerry-Ann is a global speaker and CEO of Trafalgar Strategies, a global strategic advisory and business consulting firm. On a personal level, I'm looking forward to speaking with someone so fiercely passionate about the little person, because after all, hundreds of millions of us fellow humans run or work for a small and medium business, and there's always something new to learn. In this episode, we chat about anchoring your business with your sense of purpose or higher self, losing the echo chamber and finding the right partners, leveraging difficult economic times in order to scale and get ahead, and the distinction between scale and growth. I particularly love how Kerry-Ann also talks about her time with that Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. That's towards the end of the episode. Be sure to tune into that one as well. So whether you're tuning in from your tube ride in London or the mountains of Patagonia, I'm glad you're here. Episode 8, let's begin. Kerry-Ann, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Daniel, what a pleasure and a joy. I'm so looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Likewise. Kerry-Ann, you've got a really interesting background. Lawyer, lobbyist, fundraising leader. Now you're a fervent global champion of the so-called little person. Quite an evolution there. How did that happen?
Yeah, I know, right? It's sort of this interesting little journey. I think I've been asked that question a bit, and it has allowed me to sort of think back a bit, like where did this sort of passion for business owners, and particularly business owners of small and medium-sized companies, come from? And I think from a more sort of like emotional perspective, I realized that my role models from when I was sort of a young tot really were owners of small and medium-sized companies. So my father's friends, the people that were the ones we called upon to support our communities, the folks that were in our church who were doing, amazing things to make sure that our city and our church community really thrived. They were always the owners of businesses, and they were tend to be local businesses. And so I do think I have this really deep down sort of very childlike connection to the idea of what does it mean to own a business. But I think, though now as an adult, so when I paused a moment there because I just remembered when I was in junior high school, I really was the president of the Future Business Leaders of America club. And, it's one of those things where I'm like, well, maybe I really liked it from the beginning. But
It's in your
nonetheless,
blood.
as an adult, What was that?
It's in your blood.
I think it's in my blood, right? But as an adult, though, having been able to develop some skill sets around strategic planning and being able to develop and execute large projects and be able to see where, I can kind of look and see, well, here's where a problem exists and, here's how we can fix it. I think maybe, it comes from those younger days, but now on the flip side, where I'm able to see where, you know, a little solve in a problem of business can fix something real quickly as opposed to it blowing up. I think that's where I kind of get the juice now. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I think it's always been in my blood, but um, I do have a bit of an affinity towards it.
Yeah, nice. I love how you mentioned about your youth. Something that I can very clearly recall when I was in primary school. I think it was about 9 or 10 years old, and I was at a mate's house, and his dad came home at 6 p.m. And for me, that was a really, really big deal because my dad owned his own business, a small IT company, and he
Yeah.
very rarely came home at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And I remember asking my dad, I said, Dad, why can't you come home at 6? Like, like my friend's
Yeah.
dad. And he said, Son, when you're a bit older and you've studied a bit more, you'll understand. You'll understand.
Yes.
And yeah, he was actually
And now
quite
you do,
successful.
yeah?
Yeah, he was quite successful, but at the time, all I wanted was just my dad to be home at 6. But little
Isn't
did I
that
know
it?
that in order to put food on the table, to put me through school, he had to work. And as a small
Yes.
business owner, you often have to go above and beyond, say, a clerical job, right?
Yeah. So true, so true. And as kids, we only really just want the presence of our parents. But I do think that, um, a lot of times parents want to shield us as kids from these kinds of realities of life. But I have found that, I have nieces now, they're all sort of in the late teens, early 20s stage now. But I see them. They saw us building our businesses. All three of us. I've got a brother and a sister. My brother has a large medical practice in Atlanta, and my sister, while she's a nurse by training, she owns a real estate business. And so, they all saw us doing this thing and coming along with the journey. And even though they've all chosen different paths, there's a certain amount of respect and understanding around what it looks like to run a business.
Mhm.
And I think, if you have some audience members who are like feeling the shame, I'm like, oh my God, I'm running a business, I can't get home by 6, you know, I would say release that, release it, bring your kids along on the journey because there's a different way to there's various ways to live and enjoy life and experience life and move through the world, and business ownership is one of them.
Are you saying bring your kids to the office, Kerry-Ann? Are you trying to start a revolution here or something?
I don't know, maybe you and I could start that revolution together, Daniel. I maybe, I think bring your kids to the office is, to be fair, maybe I do come from the avenue where I do believe that while we should be educating our kids on mathematics and science and English and whatever the language is and those kinds of things, I do think that we should start real early in teaching kids what it means like to run a business. We all have to make a living, and this concept of how do you make a living, should it be around looking to another person's business so that you can provide food for your table, or is it about how do you cultivate your skill sets, your passions, your giftings to be able to make a living in that way? And if you begin to normalize the idea that, we're born on this earth, we get a chance to experience all of its abundance, but we all have to make a living and provide for ourselves. And one of the ways you can do that is by running your own business. I think it's a beautiful lesson to be taught.
Amen. Take your future by the horns. Yeah, it's not lost on me the fact that I spent so many hours trying to learn calculus and trigonometry and so much stuff at school that for me and probably a lot of people is not particularly useful. I would much rather have been taught basic foundational skills around marketing, around, managing risk,
Oh yeah.
around everything that makes up running a small business, because you kind of have to be
Oh
a
yeah.
jack of all trades, right? When you're first starting out.
Yeah. Yeah, Daniel. I think, if you can think about the long runway it takes for people, right, to start a business. Like if say you're not say you didn't go to Harvard Business School, right? Or, you didn't grow up in a family that had a large corporation, so you didn't really sort of see that. Think about the long runway it takes for regular folks to be able to get their business, systemized, able to be scaled, to have the growth process, to have the inflection point that allows you to go up. I mean, that runway would be so short if we simply provided those basic tools and learnings that to all people, to every kid going to school. That way, yeah, they don't doesn't mean that they have to own a business when they grow up, the same way people can choose to go to be a doctor, or some people can choose to work somewhere, and whatever, you can be an astronaut or whatever the case may be. But at least giving people and kids the basic tools that is normative, like normal, like not like, oh look, they like, when I was in junior high school, future business leaders of America, right? You don't need to have a club like that. You could just simply say, hey, here are some of the skills that we teach children. They can choose to use them as they go. I agree. I was really good at calculus, but I just don't use it in my life.
And I'm sure there are people that do, but yeah, I think to throw everyone at it and make whole exams about it, like, man, that's, I don't know. I think I've still got nightmares. I
Yeah.
clearly need to heal from that process.
Look, Daniel, I'm not saying I actually loved calculus. I was one of the people who really loved it, and I'm glad I was taught it because it really was a great experience. I just don't use it in my professional life. The same way, if we taught all kids basics of business, they could love it and still not use it in their professional life, but it's normalized. Knowing those skills is normalized.
You know what? I'm gonna have to pull you up on that one. I think you're wrong. You do use it in your professional life because we're talking about this now, so it does have some use, right?
Yes, that is true. And I do a
Um,
little bit of X, X times 10.
nice, nice.
Depth of it, right? Yeah, no, no, no. I think I definitely use it in my life, but the depth of, like, because I did calculus one, calculus two, I did advanced calculus, right? I'm doing like the first week of calculus right now.
Yeah, you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Before we caught up, I pulled some stats on just how many people are actually employed in a small business,
Yes.
in small medium businesses. Now, these stats are based on Australia, but be interested to hear your thoughts on what corresponding stats are like in America. So, in
Yes.
Australia, out of 2.6 million businesses that exist, 98% are SMEs. Of that,
Yes.
1.55 million are micro businesses, which are classified as single staff members, predominantly in the construction industry. Close to 50% of Australians are employed by a small business, and over 60% of new apprentices are also employed by a new business. So, about 32% of Australia's total GDP actually comes from small and medium enterprises. These are
Yes.
huge, huge numbers. I think
Huge
people
numbers.
don't necessarily, I didn't realize personally how big these numbers are and how important small and medium businesses are to the world economy.
Yeah, Daniel, those numbers mimic the rest of the world. So in the States, we're looking at two-thirds of folks work for a small and medium-sized business. About we're about, like, I think 90% of businesses are small, medium-sized. Um, you start looking at Europe, they're closer towards Australia's numbers. Africa, they're like almost at 99, and in
Mm.
Asia, very similar. So we're looking at, this is not some sort of cute thing. While I, obviously, love to consider myself a champion of small business, and I have obviously some childhood affinity towards the idea. But this is not some play situation. Our economies, the entire world's economies, are dependent on small businesses, period and done. And so when we start looking at the landscape of, say, when the world gets into recessionary years, right? And governments are always trying to make sure they're buttressing their economic growth, and so they usually invest resources, depending upon obviously on the country. But I know in the U.S. we invest a great deal of resources to sort of buck up um, large corporations, making sure that they don't go too far under, they don't have too much of a loss of employment, those kinds of things. Back in, what was it, 2017, I'm sorry, 2007 crisis, the banks were supported, as well as the car industry were supported significantly. But when you
Supported,
start
that's an
looking
interesting
at,
way to describe it.
well, I'm just trying to be, I'm just trying to make it all nice and, not offend. But when you start looking at what was being done for small businesses, it's a very different landscape. And the thing is, what you need to do to keep small businesses going, obviously, financing, making sure there's resources there is really important. At the same time, if you provide just even some basic tools and be able to have expertise on how to be able to pivot, or how to be able to handle a recessionary environment, those businesses can thrive because they're way more agile and can pivot better than the larger companies. And when you look at, I think the number you told me was 60%. We have about 2/3 of people that are working for small businesses. It behooves us, our entire, all of our countries, all of our economies, to be able to take that seriously. And so those numbers are real.
100%, yeah. And actually, I'm interested to know, given your background as a lobbyist, I'm sure you would have come into
Yeah.
contact with many politicians. And we all know that
Yeah.
politicians love big business. They love courting big business. As you just mentioned, they
Yes,
can
yes, yes.
assist certain sectors when they run into trouble. Um,
Yes.
did you see much government policy that was centered towards helping SMEs, or were you able to influence those sort of policies as your time as a lobbyist?
Well, when I was lobbying, I was doing more sort of consumer rights stuff, and also food safety. So it's a little bit different than what I'm doing now, but it's all mixed in, right? Because when you start looking at, for instance, the time that I was doing, sort of looking at how our food manufacturing systems were working, and um, what I found was that the large corporations are, one of there's a reason, Ryan. Again, we can kind of look at it politically or whatever. We won't go down that road. Just look at it from a more pragmatic perspective. Large corporations, their employees, there's like a sort of a cycle. We call it the revolving door. I don't know what it looks like in Australia, but there is, the people that are in power, or working for our agencies, at some point did stints in large corporations, usually. And so there's a mixing of it, which it makes it easy for there to be like influence and pressure, which doesn't even require a lot of pressure. Just these folks are socializing at, someone's. I remember distinctly, I was at a hearing and I was doing some a talk, and afterwards, obviously, you sort of meet the folks who are decision makers. I remember I was waiting to have a conversation with someone, and while I was just waiting, I sort of, not eavesdrop, but it was part of the larger conversation. Like, oh, are you going to be at so and so's bridal shower? And that was a lobbyist from one of the large corporations asking one of the leaders of our food safety agencies whether or not they were going to be attending some mutual friend's baby shower. So you don't have to really go that far to have a conversation at the baby shower around, well, what we're thinking at this company is we really need this. So a large part of this kind of idea of how do we influence policy within the small business realm. First, it's identifying. First, I think first fundamentally, as small business owners, is recognizing, taking into your ethos the stats that you share, Daniel. So that I think when you hear those stats, you realize, wait a minute, I'm really vital and important to the economy, to my economy. So it gives you a certain amount of, like, your shoulders go back a little bit, your head's a bit higher, because you recognize the responsibility you really have, not just to your employees and your customers and your investors, but also to the way that your country is going to survive and therefore grow and therefore provide resources for all of its citizens. So then you say, okay, if I recognize my own importance, the importance of the business and the importance that I role that I play in the business and thus in the economy, then you begin to sort of say, okay, what responsibility do I have now to influence policy that's going to support myself and other business owners that are holding up the sky here? So you then sort of find out, okay, well, what agencies are out there? What federal agencies, what governmental agencies exist that support small business? Here in the U.S., we have the Small Business Administration. And I have to say, it's one of those things where, I mean, I've known about the SBA since I was very young, because again, just in the world that I operated in, I had, friends of my dad who, were always talking about the SBA. But the SBA is a huge, agency, obviously not as large as, say, the Department of Defense, but it's a good sized agency that provides a great deal of resources for small businesses. However, because so many, I can't tell you how many conversations I have with small businesses, they're like, oh, I didn't even know about the Small Business Administration, right? Now, we can talk about, oh, it's not funded very well, they need to do this, they need to do that. In the end, though, people don't even know it exists. So, what is it? How can we as business owners take responsibility to then say, what's out there, and then what are the missing links? And how can we, what do we need to be supported? And then sort of go from there. And whatever it looks like, if you live in a democracy, then there's certain things that you can do in a democracy. But even if you live in a country that's not completely democratic country, there are ways that you can be able to influence government that allows for that. And it's not just government. We also look at private sector, right? Large corporations in the private sector do have a role to play to invest in small business as well. So we could go down a whole big, rabbit hole on that, Daniel. But the reality is that, yes, I didn't see a lot of sort of programs out there for small businesses at that time, even though I was lobbying for other issues. But even now, as I look back and I kind of see, wow, it's easy to influence policy if you're hanging out at someone's bridal shower with the person
Of
that's going to help
course.
you do that. But
And I would
you
imagine,
can't.
given how many millions and millions of businesses there are and business owners there are in America or even Australia, there's probably not enough politicians to go around to have these barbecues
Oh,
with, right?
I know,
At least none that
I
would have
know,
real power.
I know. But I do say this one thing though, because you can feel a little defeatist. You're like, well, I don't, I'm not hanging out at bridal showers with the folks that make the decisions. But I think first of all, it's just showing up somewhere, right? So whether it's showing up at that town council meeting that's going to talk about, what Main Street's going to look like, okay? Because guess who populates Main Street? Small businesses, right? It's your barber shop. It's what I mean. I mean, obviously right now Main Street is changing, in the world, right? But it's your barber shop. It's your nail tech person. It's the people that um, do these things, and so even just showing up at town council meetings alone is just showing up. And then once you show up, human beings, Daniel, want to be part of things that are something that's bigger than themselves. Your employees want to feel that way, and you do too. You show up, next thing you know, you join a committee. The next thing you know, you're running for something. That's kind of how it works. But
Get
just show
stuff
up.
done. Love it. Yeah.
Yep.
And from what I'm hearing, a key theme of what you were just talking about is personal responsibility and really, and also promoting independence. So at the moment, fair to say, these are times of great economic uncertainty. We've got high inflation, we've got lower growth levels. So that's a bit of a perfect storm. We would ideally like to get
Yeah.
away from a situation of stagflation where there's stagnant
Yeah.
growth and high inflation. But anyway, that's more of a
Yeah.
macro theme. With the
Yeah.
independence argument in mind, and let's assume that we don't have a politician that we can lean on for a bailout, how can business owners
You're not hanging out a
ensure
baby shower.
consistent exactly. How can business owners ensure consistent positive cash flow given these uncertain times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a question that obviously we talk a lot about in my business and helping businesses sort of thrive during these times. Um, obviously there's the bullet points that you probably have all read on somebody's article online, or you definitely want to take an assessment of what's going on in the business. So, if you have a if you don't have enough cushion to kind of ride the storm, then sort of taking a look at what are the areas in your budget that you can begin to finagle, cut back on, whatever, to be able to provide additional cushion. That's always a good thing. At the same time, I do often say, um, depending upon what the owner, so most of the businesses that I work with are owner managed companies. um, and so they're still in the business, which means that their stories still permeate the culture of the company. So if you have a bit of a, depending upon what your money story is, some folks will tighten the belt so tight where they are not investing in the business at all because they're like, I'm going to hang on to all the money I've got, which makes sense, in the way, sort of logically. The problem with that is businesses cannot grow without there being inflection of cash investment in things. So if you find that your money story gets you anxious to the point where you're just hanging on to the cash, so you're not investing into anything, any marketing, anything, then I would just encourage you to sort of take a breather. I know it's easier said than done, but find a way to get yourself into a more relaxed place so that you can see, are you really, is that cushion, like, are is the lack that you're experiencing real, or is it just a part of your money sort of that's keeping you feeling like you don't have any money to be able to invest and to grow? So that's one thing. The other thing is, another part of the money story is, like, they might feel like, oh, here's an opportunity here to grow, and here's an opportunity to grow and grow. So you're just like putting money in places that really aren't going to do anything for the business, or will bring a little bit return, but not enough to make you like deplete the cushion. So if your money story is more about, I've got to find options, I'm going to keep spending, then I would recommend you also pause a bit and think about, how can you come up with the best investment in the business to be able to see it grow. What I have found in my 10 years of running this particular type of business, where I am advising business owners, partnerships in the times of sort of uncertainty, financially, is one of the best investments that you can make. Meaning, I'm not saying get a partner in the business. However, if you can find ways to expand the community of people with whom are vested in your business and with whom you're vested in theirs, it expands the number of people who have eyeballs on your company. Therefore, it increases the number of possible customers, therefore increases your cash flow. So if you can, I'm like, well, my husband's like, well, my business is this, and that, you can't find partners. I'm like, you can find an ally and a partner in any business. You just got to sit down and ask the question. So,
Mhm.
I often say, just do a doodle, like, grab whatever your thing is. I love to just write. Some people love to just type. I love a good whiteboard. Just start thinking, okay, here's the business that I am in. Who could be a possible partner? So, obviously the first sort of obvious ones are going to pop up for you. You're like, oh yeah, so I own a clothing brand. So maybe the first thing you might think about is, oh, well, maybe I have a photographer, that friend who does sort of full on, those sort of, big photo shoots, and they need fashion for the person who's going to be doing. So you might partner with them. So that's an easy go. But you'd be surprised if you just spent time just brainstorming and not censoring your thoughts, maybe bringing a friend along to help you think this through. Maybe you and your team can do it. That way you can come to think about, oh, wait, here's some other ways that I can partner to expand. And then always think about, if you are trying to develop partnerships with other business entities so that you can have a wider net, always think about what value you can bring to the table that can help them. And sometimes some companies, some business owners aren't as forward thinking. So you may need to come to them first and say, hey, look, I can help you with this because I've got this client base, and they're always going to need your service for this. So that's how it's going to benefit you, and then lead with that, then go from the other end, like, in addition, here's how it can benefit me, kind of thing. So I think, yes, first sort of start with the money thing. You do need to have some cushion. You don't know how long these things are going to go. At the same time, so watch your money story, but don't be like freaking out on the news and blah blah, like, those things, like, like, it's weird, like, I'm like, oh, this company laid off and then this company laid off. Don't watch those things, because the truth is it's not helpful. So don't get all inundated by the bad news. Reality is, it's a cycle. These economic cycles happen all the time. Anyone that's above the age of 35 have been to a couple of them, so it's not really that big of a deal. I mean, it is a big deal, but these things happen. However, identify sort of where you are financially, the business. And then, instead of tightening too tight, think about how you can expand through partnerships. That to me is one way that you can begin to sort of put yourself out there.
Love it. Yeah, and in Australia, this is actually, I don't think we're in a technical recession just yet, but we might be coming into one soon. We haven't had a recession since 1991, right? So that's once in my lifetime that we've had a recession, and I don't remember it because I was three. And people are understandably quite worried about what's happening at the moment and what the future holds. But for me, I think that a crisis is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to invest in yourself. It's an opportunity to look at the world and the skills that are needed tomorrow and actually get ahead. So while a lot of people are stressing, you invest in yourself. You find your tribe. You find those partners that you were just talking about. Upskill. And then once the times are good, you are going to be so much better positioned than most other people.
Daniel,
What do you
you're
think of that?
absolutely right. Most of the businesses right now that are like the big ones started during recessions. So it's not really, it really is just cyclical. It's not a thing to worry about. I mean, yes, it's scary because it's like, there's, feast or famine, but during the feast stage of the economy, businesses really don't, they don't new businesses don't thrive much during those times. It is when the ones during those lower times in the cycle is when you see new businesses pop up, and you see new businesses coming up with new things. I think it's also sort important to recognize that, um, the there's a so I was thinking about a client the other day during COVID. Well, like right when the stay-at-home orders were instituted, the company's based in Spain. This is one of my favorite clients, and really, it was a bad, it was a very sad week, um, for me, for all of us, right, in the business world, particularly small businesses. But because I was listening to all, like, I was dealing with all of our clients who were like freaking out. So you can imagine the amount of self care that I had to do during that first 2 weeks, just being able to manage all of the bad news that I was receiving from clients. But I'll never forget this one because literally we were sitting on Zoom, and she was crying, and she has, I don't know, at that time I think maybe had a team of maybe 15. I'm not really remember, but they were somewhere in Spain, somewhere in Brazil, and somewhere in another country in Latin America. So, and then she also had a couple on the continent of Africa. So all she could think about was, because she had a regulated company, so there was some regulations that came forward in order to manage it during the stay-at-home order. And I have to say, it did look very bleak, but there's no way I could tell her that I felt it was bleak, right? But she's crying on the phone because she's like, I'm going to have to let the staff go. And these are people who she loves and she cares about, and she doesn't want to like have them in a situation to
Yeah,
bind,
that's
right?
tough.
But she
Yeah.
couldn't see a way out. And yeah, obviously I was like, look, let's allow for the gravitas of the situation to sink in, and respect the gravitas of the situation. But once we did all the crying and the yes, it's sad and they're there, then we're like, okay, so what we're not going to do is let the business go. So let's come up with some additional ways that you could pivot, blah blah blah. And of course, for her, it was like, there's no other way. This is the business model, blah 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 blah. That's the first initial reaction that people will have. So if you've already gone through that stage where you're like, there's no way to partner with anyone, there's no way to pivot, the business model is this, that's fine. That's a normal stage of the process. So there you are, do whatever it is you need to keep saying that. I would know you need to say that for a day or for a week, but recognize it's not true. Yeah. So once you sort of gone past that stage, then what we did for her was she really first started with the care and tending of her team. So she just was like, she just started sending lunches being to be delivered to her team on a regular basis. She started like, listening to them, talking to them, just sort of the care and tending. Once that kind of was the feeling, like the sort of the feeling of certainty, or at least not necessarily certainty, but at least not fair, settled in for the team, right? So that's a basic need. So you can't expect to go to your team and say, hey, let's brainstorm about how we're going to make this work, when they're freaking out about, is this going to work? My health of my family, what is this weird thing happening, blah blah blah. And for you
The
guys,
world might be
you
ending.
know
Why are we talking
right,
about
the world might
strategy if
be
the
ending.
world's ending?
Exactly. Exactly. So, there is there's a basic human needs, and whatever. So you do that. But once there was some amount of like oxygen in the room, the proverbial room, then sort of saying, okay, what are some ways that we can make this work, right? So she and I had done a great deal of work of coming up with some real good solutions, but these are solutions that, because I'm strategic at heart. So obviously I'm going to really be thinking about that. But, I can come up with all the great strategies, but until they test the road, and the team is the one that has the finger on the pulse. So her going back to the team and coming up with, delivering what some of the ideas, but also allowing them to spew. Let me just tell you, that company not only hit all kinds of revenue goals, okay, within a period of a year, but within that year, when other companies in her industry had like no longer existed, she thrived. Her company was voted best company to work for. She was able to develop a whole
Nice.
like bonus system for her employees, where they were like they had never had before. The company is like thriving. Why? Because she said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the cry because it's awful. Yes, it's scary. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the denial. It's not possible. I can't pivot. There's no way to do this. Okay, fine. That's cool. Get through that stage. Now there's the care and tending of yourself and your team. Then you start going to like, okay, what could we do if we could do something? Right? So something you can't, sometimes you can't even go straight to what can we do. It's like, okay, nothing we can do. But if we could do something, what could we do? right? And you'll be
Hypothetically speaking,
surprised
of
that when I
course.
just hypothetically think speaking, because of course you can't do anything, then you start coming up with new ideas and all this really cool things because the brain, our capacity is unlimited. We have unbelievable capacity to create. So recognize that and don't live in the fear. Yes, fear is a reality of our human existence. We can't eliminate fear so much. There are techniques you can use to calm your fears down, learn them, do them, whatever. But in the end, just recognize if you say never die, like you just like it's like a never die. Like it's like we don't walk away. We don't go aimlessly into the night silently and just disappear. We just never say die. And so once you know that you have burnt your bridges, this is your business, you're in it. It doesn't give you the escape route. You can't just say, "Oh well, did that, didn't work. I'll go back and work for someone," or whatever the thing is that keeps you tethered to shore. But burn the bridges, get out there in the ocean, and you'd be surprised at the creativity that you can come up with, you and your team. And if you don't have a team, definitely your board of directors of people around you that are supporting you.
Great advice. And this business that you're talking about, Kerry-Ann, was it a small, medium enterprise? So were they able to pivot really quickly based on the situation that they were experiencing,
Yes,
say, compared to
yes,
a large business?
right. Which is one of the reasons why, everyone talks about, the benefits of being small versus large. One of the things around being small is that you can pivot much faster. So they had a team of about 15 or so employees. So, it's small. They were able to do some really interesting things once they all agreed to it. But, you're still dealing with, even if you're pivoting and even if you are agile as a smaller company, if you've built the business off of a particular business model, it's very difficult to just change it, even if you are, a smaller size. But you also do need to, but you do have the benefits of, of pivoting, if you are small.
Yep. And I guess if you're not particularly strategically minded, and not everyone is, there's certain people that it's just not part of their skill set, then it's about finding the right people that can bring that skill set into the equation. Because ultimately we're not
Exactly.
born with all the skills in the world. You didn't learn you weren't born knowing calculus. I wasn't
Right.
born knowing how to record a podcast. These skills are
Right.
learned, but we
Right.
learn from other people. And to do
Yeah.
that, we can't be in an echo chamber where we just hear our own voice reverberating, right?
Yeah. That's the joy of building a team. One of the things that, I do have a few companies that do come to me and they're still sort of like, solopreneurs or one or two folks, but they're building something that's very profitable. But it's one of the things I push people. It's almost like, when you have the birds and they push their babies off the net, out the nest, like go fly. I think building a team is one of the most important parts of really building a business at last. It's
Hmm.
not, there's so many benefits to it, right? One of which is you have people who are vested in the business and you can pitch and catch um and come up with ideas. There's so many times when I think something is like a great idea in my head. I'll wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, this is a great idea in the business, and I'll share with the team and they're like, I'm sorry, what? I'm like, well, don't you think it's a great idea? They're like, well, we're thinking this, and then have different people who have permission. That's one of the reasons to you build a team. Give people permission to be able to share their minds, right?
Mm.
So, you know, that's why it's really important to have other. But if you are and you're, working a business and you're still at the stage where it's just you, and maybe you have a couple of contract workers, but they're not fully vested in the company. Um, have a board of directors that's vested there, that you've given permission to speak into your life and into the business, so that you're not in an echo chamber. You just can't be there, or else you think every idea is great. But remember, we all have this subconscious mind that has been trained and programmed since very young, and a lot of times those thoughts aren't real thoughts. They're not true. They are the stories that have been told to us, the thoughts that we've had from very young. And remember, from the age of 0 to 7, those we had no consciousness in the sense that we weren't able to filter things. So a lot of our beliefs are coming from really poor programming. So we can't often always rely just solely upon our own thinking. One, you really do need to have a community, a cadre of people who, and even if it's not a board of directors, developing friendships with other business owners. My only caveat with that is you want to have business owner friends who are also thriving to build a business that lasts, and also some of them need to have already been worth further along the journey than you. So I notice a lot of times people will stay in the same circle, and next thing you know, you're look like you haven't scaled, you haven't grown, and you're like, well, where are your friends? Let me see who your friends are. You can't get a sense. So, but either way, you do need to be able to have people that are going to that you've given permission to speak truth, so that you're not in that weird echo chamber and you think every idea is coming, you're like, makes sense or is a good idea or actually is true.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And coming back to the point that you made earlier around feeling tethered, to the reality or your own existence, do you feel that as a business owner, you need to actually have a sense of higher purpose and have your business connected to it? Or can a business just be a business and just be for the money?
Yeah, so I think we as humans thrive when there is a higher purpose. The higher purpose can be, though, that you love running a business, right? It yes, it can, there can be other values that you attach on to how you're running the business, what the products are that you're selling, what are the services you're in, and what is the ultimate impact of it. I believe the work that I do has a fuller purpose. It's not just me doing business strategy and with companies and helping them grow and scale. For just for the purpose of growing and scaling, I do believe that I have other values that I bring. I love when I see employees thriving in a company that's emotionally healthy, or I love seeing when a company is able to impact their local communities in a way where they're holding up the quality of life of their community. So there is some amount of value that I add to those things. But in the end, I love running a business. I love being an entrepreneur. That is passion for me. And so that can be the motivating factor for anyone, and it's okay.
And it's also really obvious when someone is super passionate. Like I'm seeing your energy come through. You're on the other side of the world, and I can see how passionate you are about this. So you're in your element.
Yeah,
And yeah, it sounds like it doesn't need to be necessarily this gigantic, spiritual or religious purpose. Running a business can be it, and it can just be it in the moment. And
yeah.
maybe tomorrow will be different, but
And
today,
tomorrow
if
could be
that's it,
different.
go for it, right?
Exactly, Daniel. That's the thing. Give ourselves that space. Tomorrow, it can be different. You may decide that there's something else you want to do. And I think, too, that's the other thing about business. Obviously, it takes a while to build a business in the way that you want to build it. But one of the motivating things that I think for people who love building businesses is is this, we I often talk about the balancing act. And one of the talks that I often do, and I'm always asked to do at conferences, is a talk that I call scale versus growth, sort of balancing act between, scaling versus, burnout. Okay. Because that's a real thing. Okay. Um, but within that space, I often say, so I have a fundamental philosophy that says scaling too quickly is can be even more detrimental than not scaling at all. So I have a philosophy around that, and that's my truth. However, sometimes on the flip side, it goes back to the story we talked about, right? On the flip side, we have people that scale so slowly because they're just like every little big decision that needs to happen in the business, they're just marinating on it and doing the whole thing. And it takes a long time. And you're like,
You got to get on
guys,
with
it's
it.
been 10 years. You're still in the same place that you were before. So there again, each personality, each owner, you know, different. Okay. My thing is, though, one of the things that can be a motivating factor for those that are sort of slower going than like the too fast people, the too slow folks, if you know that you have like multi, you're like multi passionate. Okay. So maybe the company you're building right now is, so I've got a good friend. She's not a client, but she's a good friend. She's, she's just like multitasking. She's into fitness as a whole, but there is, she wants to start a Pilates studio, right? But she's also really into the fashion of fitness. And then she's very much into spin. And so there's all these different competing interests that she has. And and way that I teach is like pick one, pick one, pick one, and go with it. Okay. At the same time, a motivating thing for you, if you're like multi-passionate and you do thrive off of sort of the passion of building businesses, is that you're like, okay, I'm giving myself 5 years to build this, say this Pilates studio. Then I'm going to bring in someone who's going to be the implementer. Then I'm going to bring in someone else who's going to be the sustainer. And while I bring in the implementer, I'll be working in the Pilates studio, but setting up the next thing with the fitness fashion. Then once a sustainer is there and they're doing the stuff, then I'm going to exit stage left with a really great contract, and then really move into building the fashion, the sports fashion and sports apparel. And you can decide, okay, over the next 20 to 30 years of my life, I want to build this company, this company, this company, and that company. And the way that I'm going to do it is by doing this, bringing in someone who's more of an implementer. Then once that thing is, I'm going to bring someone that's more of a sustainer. And then you're going to exit stage left and build this other thing and do that. And that will give you a lot of motivation to be like, yeah, I've got to, if you're a slow goer, yeah, I've got to move this quickly because I want to go to the next thing, and I want to go to the next thing. So there's a lot of ways that you can, um, I don't always say that anything like none of our personalities and our core stuff, nothing is wrong with who we are. We have to recognize being self-aware to know how we show up. And there's like radical self-acceptance, right? Like you realize, yeah, I'm a bit of a turtle when it comes to this. So then you know that. So then you come up with tools and techniques that get you to be a little faster. If
Yeah.
you know like you're a rabbit or sprinter coming out real fast, you're like, radical self-acceptance. However, it's not serving me very well, so I'm going to come up with tools and strategies to slow me down. But either way, you can use your passions to motivate you to do the thing, whatever the thing is that you want to create for your life.
Yeah. And you probably have to get to know yourself first in order to even consider these questions, right? That's a good start.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the self-awareness part of it. And look, Daniel, looky here, you can go and live in a beautiful cave and spend your time trying to navel gaze a bit and know about yourself. That's one way of doing it. But the truth is, none of us have time living in a Western world, living in a more, you know, in the kind of world that we live in, particularly if you want to run a business, it's difficult to take that kind of time to do the navel gazing and then move into life. So I always say it's create structures in your life that allow for you to develop and to grow and to be self aware and to do the work simultaneously as you are building your business or whatever the case may be. And the truth is, one of the things about building a business that I have found, and I've seen it myself and with a lot of my clients, is that building a business is one of those places where you are going to have to confront yourself. I mean, you get a lot of things you can ignore in life, and never know that you have this weird story or this weird belief. But building a business, it is going to expose it all. So, welcome
Mm.
on.
Enjoy the ride. Strap yourself in.
Yeah.
Kerry-Ann, I'm quite curious. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial that you were involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that actually happened? And I know it may not have
Oh,
much to do with what we were talking about before, but I am very curious as to what that's all about,
yeah.
and particularly
It
what
still
you came out of that
remains
with.
the most amazing thing that I experienced, not just thing that accomplished, but one of the most amazing experiences of my life, not just professionally, but in my own life. And it's one of the things that I'm most proud of, besides being a fantastic friend and family member. Um, so you obviously have an international audience. We have a holiday in the United States, and a federal holiday, or one would call national holiday, um, that honors Dr. King and his legacy, and it's in January, and that came about in the early '80s. Okay, well, the idea for the memorial, the actual holiday had not even become a national holiday. While at the time that the idea of building the memorial happened, so the idea was basically concocted by these three members of, and I believe all three of them are now deceased, but three members of Dr. King's fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. It's an international fraternity. It's a historically Black fraternity, and many notable African American men in past and present are members of that fraternity. Okay, so these men happen to be part of the member of the fraternity, and they were just kind of sitting around a coffee table for breakfast once, and they were like, hey, wouldn't it be great to build a memorial for Dr. King on the National Mall? Keep in mind, Daniel, that all over the US, there are smaller scale memorials of Dr. King. Big major boulevards throughout most major cities are named after Dr. King. So this is not like a novel concept, but why this is a novel concept is because in Washington, D.C., on what we call the National Mall, which when people see movies, it's the big space of land that's anchored by the Capitol that has the round rotunda and the Lincoln Memorial in the middle of it. You see the tall Washington Monument, and then you sort of see on the side of that is the White House. So that whole piece of land is called the National Mall. Besides those four, the Capitol, the White House, the Washington Monument, and Lincoln Memorial, there are other memorials, but they are only memorials. I mean, before Dr. King's memorial was built, they're only memorials that are to our veterans, and then some other presidents. So we've got a memorial for Jefferson, for our President Jefferson there. You'll have the Vietnam Memorial. You've got World War One, World War Two. So my point is that this is not like a civilian place, right? Folks don't just show up on the National Mall for a memorial, right? So
Yeah, it's a big
the
deal.
idea,
Big deal.
right? It's kind of a big deal. So when they said, hey, why don't we build a memorial to Dr. King in the National Mall? It was kind of like, yeah, there was not even a federal holiday for him. So it was like, okay, that's great. But what they ended up doing, these three gentlemen who I respect so very much, they said, okay. They went to the fraternity. The fraternity, unlike some countries don't have fraternities or whatever. Some countries do have fraternities, but it's only for college. Like once kids graduate from college, they're done with it. Historically, Black fraternities and sororities, because of the nature of you know racism and so forth in the United States, these organizations, the folks are involved in them well into their adult life. I mean, the chapters they're very powerful organizations, and so they're professional networking, the whole thing, right? All right. So they so they have these international annual conventions. So the three gentlemen said, hey, let's take it to the convention. So they did, and everyone was like, we're so never going to have a memorial to Dr. King at the National Mall. Like, this idea is preposterous. But because these were respected gentlemen in the fraternity, they started taking they would, do a little fundraising. They'll put some coins in the bucket and say, yeah, let's keep doing it, that kind of thing. Never saying, but these guys, they were serious. So they, every year, so from the time of conception of the idea to the time when Congress approved it, it was a good 15, 20 years. Like they would go on the Hill, walking the halls, talking to all the members of Congress and senators, and basically trying to sell the idea. Eventually, they were able to get some folks who were like, maybe these folks aren't crazy, right? So they finally were able to get a congressional, thing that says, "Yep, you can do it." And then President Clinton was in office at the time, so he signed it. So now you've got like legit papers that says, "Yeah, you can build this thing." Nobody in the
Wow.
fraternity knew how to build an international memorial on a national. Who knows how to do that, right? It's kind of a big deal. So they really, what I loved about how the fraternity did this, they're like, oh, we've got this thing and it's in our name, so now we got to like be legit. So they really did some great things, and people who are building a business can think about this too. First, you got to find out who your people are. So those guys said, who are my people? Well, we have the fraternity, we're going to go with them. Once they were persistent to get the papers that said, okay, here's a charter, you are allowed to have some piece of land on the National Mall. Then there was a discussion, they had to then figure out, okay, where on the National Mall are they going to put it? Who's going to build it? What is the design going to look like? Um, how much money is it going to cost? And then now they were like, oh, it's going to be 100 something million. Oh, so now we got to have like real investors, not just folks at the fraternity putting some coins in the bucket. And that's when they were able to go to, like General Motors was the first investor of 10 million. And then we're off to the races. So, the story of building that memorial to me is another sign of, I tell that story a lot to my clients. I'm like, look, and they're like, oh, I tried this strategy, or I tried this tactic for 3 months and it didn't work. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, like it takes a while to get momentum in the things that you're doing, but if you believe in it and you're betting on yourself, it's worth going for it and doing it. But yeah, I think I came on board when they were at about, if I remember correctly, they were at about 29 million. They had raised 29 million. 10 million was coming from General Motors. And then they had a couple, like, gifts that were given from other large donors and so forth, and smaller donors. And so, but they realized they needed to bring someone on board to do this massive task. And then when I came on board, that was how she wrote. And I was like, oh, I'll go back to being a lawyer once I'm finished with this. It's gonna be like 3 years. Like, never went back to practicing law after that. But it was truly one of the most fulfilling moments and times of my life. I was able to learn so much professionally. I got a chance to meet a couple of presidents and a couple of first ladies and a couple of really
Wow.
amazing human beings that exist on this world. And I also was able to develop a professional family of people who, up to this very day, I love them. We are all scattered around wherever, but whenever we get a chance to connect, it's like real and true. We used to call ourselves like, a dysfunctional family, but it was exactly it. And again, it's one of the things that I often really try to convey to business owners. I'm like, yeah, you can build, like, I know that it's not trendy anymore to say, oh, my team is a family, and that's fine. There are people who really don't want to be a part of a family, but you can build a beautiful network of human beings who can express their giftings in a beautiful way in the company that you built. And if you can do that, that alone, I think, has a great deal of value. And even if the company goes away or stays, whatever, you cannot eliminate the connections that the human beings that help to build it have. And that's why I'm really a big fan of building teams.
Yeah, and legacy, and yeah, what an inspiring story. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's, amazing work. And it's going to be here for, well, hopefully forever, but yeah, awesome.
Daniel, it's
Love it.
weird.
Love it.
I can't tell you how weird it is. Like, I'm an Instagram girl. I love Instagram. I use it for my business, but I also like to just sort of, I follow people, that I love, celebrities and stuff. And I never, ever, ever tire of watching, of going on someone, like I'm on my feed and someone is posting a picture of themselves next to the big part of the stone. So if you haven't visited it, I would encourage you to fly to the U.S. and visit it. But if you don't, go online. you'll see how it's structured, just to give you some background understanding and the meaning. You'll see that Dr. King's image is coming out of a stone, and it's sort of the focal point of the memorial, right? It's on 3 acres of land. It's covered by cherry blossoms. Those cherry blossoms happen to were built additionally, or were added to that area of the National Mall because additional cherry blossoms, because they bloom actually on the first week of April normally, obviously different times, but usually in the first week of April in DC. And that happened to have been the April 4th was when he was assassinated. So it's really lush during that time. But anyway, so the actual stone as of him coming out, like his image coming out of the stone, he's sort of standing with his arms crossed and folded. And that the design though behind him are two boulders, and the design is coming from a quote. It says, like, we will hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. So the image, the stone that he is coming out of, is actually the stone of hope, and he's offset like almost like carved out of the two boulders behind, which represent the mountain of despair. And then it's all sort of encapsulated by a crescent shaped wall that has some of his more famous quotes. And so if you are thinking about sort of the idea of symbolism, it's so interesting to watch, like, from on Instagram, and someone's just like, some stranger is posting a picture of themselves by that stone of hope. And I'm looking at it and I'm just like, I just remember, like, when it was just an idea, and to see some stranger enjoying it and being inspired by it. Oh my God, what an amazing feeling to see that. It never gets old. And I think we often are, when we're in the weeds of building something, yeah, you get your gray hair, you don't have any sleep, your face looks like crap all the time, you're barking at your kids, although you shouldn't be doing that. But whatever the thing is that you're feeling during the time that you are building the thing, recognize that we can often take for granted what it is that we're doing. But the legacy behind it, how people experience it, I'm lucky because I can sort of go on Instagram and see, and just do a hashtag MLK Memorial, and see
Mhm.
all these pictures of people that are standing by something that I helped to make. At the same time, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it is you're selling lotion that keeps someone's face nice and supple, or whether it's because you're building, you have a great, clothing line, or whether you do yoga bags or whatever, you are touching someone's life in a way that you can't often hashtag whatever it is that you're doing and seeing people post pictures on Instagram about them, because it's more intimate, but you are impacting someone's life. And so, yeah, those moments when your dad's not coming home at 6 p.m., there you go.
Wow, so deep, so deep. Absolutely love it, Kerry-Ann. Signature question before I let you go today. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self, what is the one key piece of advice that you would give?
You know, this changes. I used to say this all the time, and I think I still will say it today. Um, but sometimes it changes. But it's. I would tell her to lighten up. I would tell her to lighten up. I would tell her to enjoy life a bit more. I used to be a pretty serious chick when I was in my
Really? I
20s. I
wouldn't think
thought
it.
that life was so serious, and I have to accomplish all these things. And part of maybe my own childhood drama. I mean, trauma was around feeling like um, I needed to achieve in order to receive love. So I would tell her to lighten up. She's lovable, even if she's not fantastic. And I would have her laugh some more and enjoy life a bit more, because in the end, we're all just walking around this blue ball, right? And it's beautiful. We get a chance to experience it and have a human experience for a little time. So that's what I would say: lighten up, enjoy life.
Great. And I love the fact that you're referring to her in third person, which shows that you've moved on and that you're a different person now, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. One of the things that, of course, not the idea of sort of multiple personalities or whatever like that. You want to split yourself. But one of the things that I have as I've done my own personal development journey is recognizing um, the stages of who I am at different stages of my life, different ages. Obviously, being aware of that, but also bringing them along on the journey and letting them go run play. There is something very healing for me. This may not be a technique for you, but for me, being able to go back and hear how I disconnected from my childhood self, my youngest self, the my teenage self, my 20-year-old self, and recognize what was happening there, and forgive myself for whatever ways in which I mishandled my heart, I guess, when I was processing those things, and then inviting them in on the journey now, so that and they don't have to do anything. They can just be here with me, whatever I'm doing, right? And go play or do whatever it is they're doing, but we're now sort of together and integrated and being able to say, this is our story. So go have fun now.
The good, the bad, the ugly, and the all. This is me. This is my
Yes,
life, my story.
exactly that. And we all have it. We all have it. And, you know, sometimes we want to, the ugly parts and bad parts, we kind of want to disengage from. But the reality is, who we are today is those parts are a part of who we are today. And so, this trying to disconnect from it, I find for myself in my own journey of this human experience, well, doesn't really work. So might as well bring it along and do the healing work, obviously, whatever that means for one self, but not ignoring it, because once you ignore it, you're ignoring a part of yourself, which then is problematic, I think.
Love it. Love it. Kerry-Ann, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed it. So many great nuggets. If the audience do want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, I'm just a real human being. So if you I'm on all the social media platforms, but I do spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn. So if you are there or anywhere, and you heard the talk and you want to connect, let's do it. And send me a message and say, hey, I'm a big fan of Daniel and I heard you talking, and let's connect. So I think that's one way you can do. And if you feel like your business is feeling a bit chaotic and you are a bit frustrated, tired, feeling a bit like, how can I fix this? I have downloaded out of every strategy out of my brain to try to identify what I think are the really true causes of chaos in businesses. I have a PDF called The Eight True Culprits Causing Chaos in Your Business. You can download it for free at www.nobusinesschaos.com. And it gives you some insight as to what could be happening in the business and some, great strategies to fix it. So that might also be helpful as well.
Awesome. I have downloaded that. I can verify to all the listeners and watchers out there, it does exist and it's got some really, really good nuggets. So get on it. Kerry-Ann, thank you again. It's been awesome to have you on. Hope you've enjoyed your time here as well.
Daniel, it has been a true pleasure and a true joy. I'm so glad that we got a chance to connect and that we can have these kinds of conversations, which are so real and true.
For sure, for sure. Definitely, it's been awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for episode 8. Kerry-Ann, thanks again. Really, really great nuggets and insights. There's probably a lot more than I can mention in a very short space of time, but just some of the ones that I have been able to pick up. Surrounding yourself with diverse opinions, get rid of that echo chamber, pivoting quickly and being decisive with your decisions, leveraging difficult economic times in order to scale, and actually making that distinction between scaling and growing. And of course, as always, anchoring your higher sense of self or your higher purpose to what you're doing day to day, in this case, running a small, medium business. If you've enjoyed this episode, I would really, really appreciate your support. Share the love, spread the knowledge, tell your friends, tell your boss, tell your colleagues, give us some feedback, like, comment, all that good stuff. It does make a really big difference to me and allows me to connect with more amazing guests such as Kerry-Ann. You can find more episodes at dancingwithdoubt.com. And as usual, I'll have my monthly blog up reflecting on my conversations with guests and giving some gratitude back. So thanks for lending me your ears wherever in the world you are. Till next time, may success be with you.